If you're an average cyclist and you're thinking about embarking on a structured training plan, here are 5 things that I've learned over a 12-week training period, and they get increasingly more unexpected as we go. And then we'll talk about power numbers and actual fitness gains that you might expect to experience over a 12-week period. Now, I've been riding bikes for over 30 years across a ton of different disciplines, and across these past 3 decades or so, I've never actually properly trained to improve my fitness on the bike. Now, the idea for this video actually started last year when I did the 2024 Mammoth Tuff gravel event up in the Eastern Sierras here in California. Now, this was by no means my first, big cycling event, but that ride in particular I had a really hard time with, and it prompted this idea of a video that basically spanned a year where I did the ride in 2024, had a really tough time having not trained properly, and then I did the same exact ride again this year, having properly trained for 12 weeks leading up to the event. Now, if you're curious about how it went, you can check out that video. It's down in the description below, but in this video I want to focus on that 12-week span that led up to the event this year in 2025. Now, part of a structured training plan to me means actually hiring a cycling coach who will keep you accountable and sort of help you out along the way. In my case, it was Coach Dave Sheek over at CTS who was helping me out with this process. Dave and Amanda are the creators of the Mammoth Tuff gravel event, and so it was kind of a perfect fit since that was the event that I was training for. Nobody knows that event better than Dave himself. So the first category of things that I learned is basically just the setup and the amount of infrastructure required to embark on a training plan like this. In order for Dave to properly coach me, he basically needs all the data, which means in addition to my normal head unit, I also needed a heart rate monitor. I also needed a power meter and a cadence sensor. I also needed to get a Training Peaks account. Training Peaks is sort of like your online training journal, and it's way more rich with data than Strava. And also your cycling coach can access your account, and so you can kind of both see all of your rides and all of your data, and the coach can make informed decisions based on how you've been performing. Now, in addition to all of that sort of infrastructure, the coach also needs your FTP number, which meant that I had to go out and do a test. So basically, before I even could start with the structured training plan, there was kind of like a week of just getting ready, setting up the bike, setting up my accounts, and going out and doing that FTP test. So anyways, the point is that this first thing that I've learned is that a proper training program actually requires quite a bit of hardware and software just to get started. Okay, so the second thing that I learned, and again, this is going to seem somewhat obvious, but it didn't really hit me until I was in it, and that's just the time commitment that's required to execute a training plan properly. And so one of the biggest things I've taken away so far is if you have family, kids, professional obligations, you really need to find those slots in your schedule where you can fit those longer rides. I basically jumped from about 30, 40 miles on average per week to, 110, 120 miles a week. And I know for a lot of cyclists, that's just normal. Like your normal weekly output is over 100 miles. It's just not what it's been for me. And so really what I'm saying is if you're going to undertake a structured training plan, clear it with the people around you as well, not just yourself. Fortunately, my wife is also an endurance athlete. She's a runner, and so she kind of understands the commitment, probably better than I do, if we're being honest. And so she was on board to pick up the slack and take care of the kids during these longer rides. But yeah, if we're talking hours before training, I might be out 2 hours, 2.5, 3 hours a week. Now it's closer to 10, 11 hours sometimes, depending on the week. So really it's a big time commitment is what I'm trying to say. So I would just say that, it sounds really nice to go full commit and just fully immerse yourself in this training program. You just have to be aware of the time commitment that it actually represents and make sure that it's okay, not just with you, but the people around you as well. All right, so that brings us to the third thing, which to me is one of these things that I was not necessarily expecting when I first started the plan, and that's all the things that are cycling adjacent, but not actually directly related to pedaling your bike. These are things like nutrition on and off the bike, hydration on and off the bike, as well as recovery time, which does include actual recovery rides, but also the effect that proper sleep has on your progress. Nutrition has an incredible impact on how you feel and your experience while you're on the bike. It's really not all about training your body and your muscles. It's also about training your gut and practicing good nutrition strategy while you're on these longer rides. You are trying to hit a certain number of calories per hour
they should be mostly carbohydrates. Some of these high carb mixes definitely mess with my gut, so I've tried to find other ways to get the calories in. So it's kind of about experimenting and seeing what you can tolerate. And then of course hydration is key. One of the things Dave always says is that you can generally make up for a nutritional deficit, but once you get behind on hydration, there's almost no catching up. So it's really important to stay on top of your hydration. And then the last thing I'll put into the sort of holistic category of training is the time off the bike. So allowing your muscles to rest and recover, and actually getting, the required amount of sleep that your body needs to do so is something that you have to prioritize. Now, 20 years ago, maybe, in my early 20s, you might be able to get away with inadequate sleep. But in my 40s now, there's just no chance. Like, I've got to at least get 7 minimum so that I feel decent throughout a ride and through the remainder of the day. And if I don't get that amount of sleep, it's just very, very noticeable.
So yeah, in addition to actually pedaling on your bike, there's so many things that you also have to keep track of. And these are all things that I just wasn't expecting to be as big a deal as they were when it came to following this plan. And so that brings me to the fourth thing that I learned. And this was something that I truly was not expecting.
Training can be somewhat isolating. And I think this might be more specific to my case, but you'd think if you're on the bike for 8-9 hours a week, you'd have plenty of chances to ride with your buddies. But in my case, it just has been the total opposite. I think just the fact that I'm doing quote unquote proper training has kind of deterred my buddies from wanting to join. So I actually have been riding way, way less with my cycling friends, and I've been doing probably 95% of my training solo.
Which for me personally is not something that bothers me too much. I'm generally okay on long solo rides. I tend to treat it as an opportunity to clear my mind, but I know for a fact that there are other personality types out there that may not do as well with this isolation. Okay, so that brings us to the fifth and final thing that I've learned, and that's just the effect that training actually has on your fitness and your power numbers over a 12-week period. Now, there's kind of a lot to unpack here, but I feel like in order for this discussion to be meaningful, we have to actually talk about some numbers. Now, my initial field test at the beginning of the training plan told me that my FTP was 216 watts. So there it is, there's your actual number. For me, I weigh anywhere from 155 to 160 pounds depending on the season, so you can calculate the watts per kg there. After 12 weeks of a pretty strict regimen, getting out 4 to 5 days a week, which included tempo days, included long endurance days, as well as some recovery rides. By the way, over the entire 12-week program, I didn't skip a single workout. So I actually did every single workout that was prescribed by the coach. And then I went out, I think it was the 10th or 11th week, and I went out and did another FTP test to get the sort of after number to see my improvement. And this is what happened.
Oh, dude. What the?
Are you too good for your home? Answer me! Suck my white ass ball!
God. Sake.
All right, so obviously I had a little bit of a meltdown there. Not super proud of it, but it did happen. Now, I'll give myself that I was pretty fatigued. This is at the end of a 12-week training program. I had just done the FTP test, and I was really hoping to see some improvement. But looking at those numbers, there was essentially zero change in FTP over those 12 weeks. And so I actually ran the calculation right then and there and calculated that my after FTP was like 2 to 3 watts higher than before. So whereas my initial test told me I was at about 216 watts, I was about 218 to 219 watts after 12 weeks of training, which corresponds to like a 1 to 1.5% gain. Your FTP probably varies plus or minus 5 watts on any given day that you take it. So in my mind, I'm thinking that, I just wasted 12 weeks. What was this all for? But then I started thinking a little bit more rationally. FTP is just one number. I've only trained for 12 weeks. What other data could I possibly look at? So I started looking at normalized power for each of the rides over the span of that 12-week period. And again, I was left a little bit frustrated. So if you look here, this is my Training Peaks calendar. For any given week, there's a combination of recovery miles, rest days, interval days, which are these 4x10s, as well as longer endurance rides, which are 3 to 4 hours. And so what I did is I actually looked at the normalized power for all of the interval days over that 12-week period, as well as all of the endurance rides over that 12-week period. And I went ahead and made a couple of plots here. These are super crude plots. It's just looking at the raw data. But what you can see here is that over the training period, it looks like I did a total of 8 tempo days. And these are the normalized power outputs for each of those rides. And so you can see that there's just no trend here. The first ride out was 161 watts. Second was 152, 153. Started to go up a little bit, 162, 166, and then we're back to 155, 154. And so in my mind, I was thinking, okay, well, these are tempo days. These are hard days. Maybe I was just being really lazy in between interval sessions. And so maybe the tempo data is not the right normalized power to look at. So then I looked at the normalized power for these longer endurance rides. So these endurance miles are supposed to be representative of sort of what I would feel during the actual event. Primarily endurance zone, like zone 2, for long periods of time. There's no intervals in any of these endurance rides. And all of these rides range anywhere from 2 hours, 45 minutes up to close to 4 hours in some cases. And so again, what I did is I took all of the normalized power from all these endurance rides. And again, what we're seeing here is basically no trend. I don't know. Maybe if you can really filter out a couple of these outliers, looks like I had a pretty good day on this day. These days I might have been feeling pretty fatigued or maybe just sick or something like that. So if you filter out these 3, then maybe the rest of the data looks like it's somewhat trending upward. First couple probably averaged 130 watts. And then by the end, we're looking at maybe 148, 150 watts normalized. And so looking at this data before the actual event was sort of my one redeeming factor, which kind of made me feel a little bit better about this whole training process. But I will say that the week leading up to the event, I was actually feeling pretty disappointed and frustrated because at the time it actually felt like I had kind of wasted this whole 12-week block. And I was putting in all these hours, trying to do everything right, and just not seeing any results. But then, I actually did the ride. And this is where everything kind of changed for me. Because if you recall, the whole reason I embarked on this training plan was to improve my time and just generally do better on the Mammoth Tuff event than I did last year. Now, I talk about some of these numbers in the actual Mammoth Tuff video, which again is linked down in the description. But last year, rolling time was something like 7 hours-ish, so 7 hours and change, which is not fast by any means. And I definitely recall at the end of that ride just feeling like absolute trash. I had no energy left. I was not in a good state of mind, and I physically did not feel well. But I finished the ride this year close to 2 hours faster than last year. So again, last year it took just over 7 hours of rolling time for me to get through the course. This year, 5 hours, 15 minutes. And I felt better when I crossed the finish line. I distinctly remember feeling pretty good as I rolled across the finish line and greeted my family. Which I know, this is just a really long-winded way for me to say that ultimately, and this hurts me personally to say, but in this particular case, the data does not tell the whole story. I know. Again, maybe we saw a little bit of an upward trend. Obviously, the FTP number for me wasn't the indicator of fitness, but what I can say is that regardless of what the data says, training actually works. And training, of course, impacts your level of fitness. I'm obviously not trying to make a case to the contrary. It's just that for an average cyclist who hadn't gone through this process before, it's just a little bit messy. It's just not as clean as you might expect when you go into it. Now, I suppose we can zoom out a little bit at this point. One question that I've had for myself is, do I want to go through this again? Do I want to continue training and continue improving my fitness? And even though the numbers may lag or they may take a while to catch up, I might actually start to see some improvements in the data. Do I want to continue being committed to a structured training plan until I see those numbers go up? For me, if I'm being perfectly honest, no, I'm not going to do it. I can't do it. For a 12-week block there, all my free time was taken up by riding. My wife had to pick up a lot of slack and it impacted her day. I spent less time with my kids over that span. If I'm being perfectly honest, the quality of work at my actual job probably started to suffer as well. So this is just not something that is sustainable for me personally. And that kind of brings me to the last point that I want to make. In the world of elite level performance oriented cycling, data is everything, and the way that you approach each ride matters. So much to the point that the term junk miles is the phrase that's used to refer to miles that are not specifically training some particular metric. And to me, that's a phrase that I simply don't like, because to me, junk miles are the miles that you go out with your friends at no particular pace. You take a lot of breaks, you socialize, you're just having fun, you have a couple beers at the end of the ride, and you go home feeling fantastic. Those are quote-unquote junk miles to cycling coaches, but to me, junk miles are the entire reason that I ride in the first place. Personally, for me, I ride for both physical health as well as mental health. And for me, one of the biggest takeaways from this 12-week training plan is that some of the mental clarity that I used to gain from just going out and riding junk miles was diminished by the fact that I'm laser focused on the data, laser focused on the particular interval and the type of ride that I'm doing that day. It started to feel more like a job than a hobby, which for me was unacceptable. Now, I have to give credit, of course, to the elite athletes that can commit to these long, structured training plans over the course of the entire year. It's just not who I am personally, and it's probably not something that I'll continue in the future. Now, I do want to shout out Dave for his help through all this. He donated his time to help me prepare for the Mammoth Tuff event, and I'm truly grateful for his support. I hope this video has been a little bit helpful to you, especially if you're someone who identifies as an average cyclist, and maybe you want to take that step into a structured training plan to just get a little bit stronger, feel a little bit better after long rides. These are just some of the things that I've learned when I committed to a structured training plan. If you have any questions, please just drop them down below. I'll be happy to answer as many as I can. That's going to do it for this one. Thanks again for watching. Thanks for subscribing to the channel if you haven't already. We'll see you next time.